Welcome back everybody to another MOTOBOB video, and today Triumph announced a whole bunch of updates for their large capacity adventure tourer, the Tiger 1200, and they may seem individually relatively modest, but we'll go through all of them in full detail, and then at the end I'll tell you why I actually think they might add up to be fairly significant. But before we get started, a huge thanks to Quadlock for sponsoring this video. If you want to mount your phone on the bars to get navigation and all your phone's features, then this is the product we absolutely recommend. So head to the link down in the description below to find out more. And also down there, you'll find a discount code specifically for my viewers. Now, first up, let's talk about the engine. And while it is fundamentally the same 1200 inline triple that makes 148 horsepower and 130 Nm peak torque, there have been a whole bunch of revisions in order to try and make it feel a little bit more refined and smooth, and also give it better comfort over distance. You see, the triples in Triumph adventure bikes, so the Tiger 900 and 1200, both use what they call a T-plane crank. So instead of the even 120-degree intervals on the crank between each cylinder on the previous generation bikes, the intervals here place two cylinders closer together and one further apart, with the crank pins arranged in a T-shape, hence the name. The idea was to increase the sensation of torque in the low revs, which I guess was an area in which Triumph had some negative feedback from their research when compared with the twin-cylinder competition like the KTMs or Africa Twin. Triples just don't typically have that big bottom end, so that was the majority of the idea, but it also does give the bike a little bit more of a snarl at the exhaust, which is something I really do like. There really is no other triple that sounds like this, in fact no other engine that sounds like this, and particularly under heavy acceleration, it's just got an awesome sound to it. Thing is though, as with most things, there's a bit of a trade-off, and with this it's the fact that it's notably less smooth, with more vibes through the bars, seat and footrests, certainly than what you might call a traditional triple cylinder engine with consistent 120-degree firing intervals. It really does start to creep in and become a bit irritating when you're spending a few hours at a time at a consistent motorway speed. And while there is that benefit of the low-end torquiness, which does come in handy when you're riding at lower speeds, and they specifically mentioned, riding off-road, which is where a lot of adventure bikes are heavily marketed, I think in the real world, most big adventure bikes are doing far more miles on the motorway than they are in the dirt. And thing is, not only is this engine configuration more vibey than their previous triples, but perhaps more importantly, it's also way more vibey than the best-selling adventure bike on the market by a massive stretch, the BMW GS. So it feels like Triumph have decided to try and do something about it, and so on this new 2024 model, they say there are changes to the crankshaft, the alternator rotor and the balancers to increase engine inertia, and so I guess they've added a bit of weightiness. The result, they say, along with some engine calibration changes, is a smoother, more precise delivery of torque in the low revs. Then they go on to say that riders will feel an increase in smoothness when accelerating and decelerating, particularly at lower speeds. But perhaps more significantly than that, they also say there's a new revised engine balancing strategy, and while I don't have any more details beyond that, they do say the result is better comfort through all the key rider touch points. This sounds like the update that's most specifically targeted to that vibiness at motorway speeds, and so I'm really looking forward to finding out whether it's done the job when we actually get to ride one of these new bikes. But it does kind of beg the question, why put the T-plane crank in the bike in the first place, especially on a bike that is realistically going to be a road bike for most people, only to then spend time issuing updates to try and tune the vibes out when the original Tiger 1200 with the even 120-degree intervals was particularly smooth. In fact, I'd even say it's a big strength of that engine, its comfort over distance. I guess the ideal though is to have an engine that's both it's characterful and torquey in the low revs, but also smooth and refined and comfortable over distance, and so perhaps I shouldn't be too negative about Triumph's engineers aiming to achieve that. And I will say, having recently ridden a 2023 Tiger 1200 back-to-back with the new R1300 GS, the T-Plane does bring a lot more excitement and a more visceral roar than the duller drone of the Boxer Twin. On top of that, they also say there's a new clutch design, and again they say this will feel smoother to the rider, specifically when changing into first gear. Now, another change that's also targeted at those vibey bars over distance is the dampened handlebars and risers, which I think use rubber mounts to try and keep things feeling smooth. These were already fitted to the Explorer models, which are more distance-orientated variants of the Tiger 1200 with the 30-litre fuel tank. But for 2024, they're also being introduced on the GT Pro and Rally Pro, and not only do they say that it'll give a smoother ride, but also help with mirror visibility, so I guess they'll be vibing around a bit less. Now, they also recently added this feature to the 2024 Tiger 900 lineup, again specifically aiming at minimizing the vibes from that T-Plane crank. Although I'm yet to ride that bike, we're getting one in a few weeks, and so I can't quite say yet if it's actually done its job. Another comfort-orientated feature is the redesigned rider seat, which they now say has a flatter profile that allows the rider more space, and that means they can shuffle around a bit on longer rides, and that can help to reduce fatigue and pressure points on your butt. Lastly, on the ergonomics front, they've also fitted a longer clutch lever, again aiding comfort over distance by allowing more space for the rider's fingers, which I guess might start to fatigue during those super long days in the saddle. Now, the GT Pro and GT Explorer models are a little bit more road biased than the Rally models, with the cast aluminium wheels and a 19-inch front, shod with road-specific rubber, as well as the slightly lower suspension and therefore lower center of gravity. Now, new for this 2024 model, they've decided to reposition the foot pegs, lifting them slightly but also moving them a little closer to the bike. And the idea here is that it increases the maximum possible lean angle, so you should be able to whip through corners a little bit quicker. Now, one assumes if they've lifted the pegs, it will decrease the amount of space between the saddle and foot peg, and so I would expect a slightly tighter knee angle, which might feel a bit less comfy over distance, but I guess that was a trade-off they were willing to make in the name of slightly better sporting abilities. Now, on top of all that stuff, Triumph have reiterated that all new Tiger 1200s will be fitted with their active preload reduction feature, which was first announced back in August 2023 and is available for the previous gen bikes as a software update. But I guess the point is now that this feature is included by default. Now, how this works is that you can press the home button on the right-hand switchgear for a second, and when you're riding at lower speeds, it'll drop the seat height by another 20 mil by minimizing the amount of preload applied to the electronically adjustable rear monoshock. You can then ride around with the bike in its new chopper stance while you pick your way through traffic, and of course it makes it much easier to get both your feet down. But once you pick back up to, main road speeds, I think if I remember correctly it's over 50 miles per hour, then the bike automatically jacks itself back up to restore its proper geometry as well as full ground clearance. It is a nice addition and also a neat software solution that uses the existing hardware on the bike, but I will say this is one of the things that came up as a glaring strength of the R1300 GS when I rode them back to back. The BMW has the ability to minimize preload both on the front and rear suspension, and so the whole bike settles down rather than just the back end. And also the GS does it automatically based upon your speed, I think, so you don't even have to think about it. It kind of feels like riding a big full-sized adventure bike when you're on the move, but as soon as you pull up to a stop, it feels a lot more manageable and almost like riding a regular street bike that's around 820mm in the seat. The Triumph feature isn't as seamless. Of course, you've got to remember to press the button when you come into a standstill, and you might not always remember to do that, but all the same, I will say it's better having this feature than not. Now, there's also a few new colors for 2024, and some of them do look rather fetching. So the GT Pro and GT Explorer, on top of the Snowdonia White and Sapphire Black that were already available, well, it now comes in Carnival Red, which is a welcome pop of vibrance. Then the more off-road focused Rally Pro and Rally Explorer models, whilst retaining the super popular matte khaki with it being such a good seller, also gets two new options of matte sandstorm, which I really do like a lot, and jet black for that Batman's dad bike kind of vibe. As for the price, well, I don't have a full list for all of the bikes, but specifically they gave us the GT Pro, and that now comes in at £17,295, which is 200 quid up on the previous year model. So I'd expect similar increases across the board, if not a little more for the more premium spec models, although you could argue that it's well worth it if they've managed to tune out some of those vibes. So like I say, some little tweaks, but thinking back to when I rode the previous generation back to back with the R1300 GS, while I did prefer the liveliness of the Tiger's engine and also I thought it handled in a more engaging way, there's absolutely no doubt that the GS is still the king when it comes to comfort over distance, as well as the new bike being leaps and bounds ahead in terms of techie features. Now there's not a great deal they can do about all the tech in terms of a mid-cycle update, but certainly they might be able to bring the Tiger a little closer to the GS in terms of comfort with some of these neat little thoughtful updates, most of which seem to be focused on making the bike more comfy. I guess we'll have to wait to ride one to find out, and also I guess I'll have to make another comparison review with the GS only a month or two after I've already made one, and it is a tough gig, but somebody's got to do it. As always, I'd love to know what you think, so do let me know down in the comments whether you think these changes are enough to address those vibey issues. I'll leave that comparison on the screen now in case you haven't seen it already, so do give it a click and give it a watch. Hit subscribe as well if you've not already to see more of the latest motorcycle news like this right here on YouTube. Many thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next video.